Hey everybody, and welcome back to the D&D Academy. Today we're going to be looking at how you can create your own virtual table when you play your online D&D sessions with a little bit of ingenuity and a lot of imagination. So if you're like me, you've been playing Dungeons & Dragons online a lot. I mean, a lot. Since 2020, I've been playing all my Dungeons & Dragons games online for the most part. I currently run 3 D&D sessions each week, all with different groups, and all of them are online. Now, since we started going to this new format of virtual D&D, I've been trying to iterate and trying to actually push the boundaries of what playing D&D online really meant. As a theater of the mind player throughout my entire life playing Dungeons & Dragons, this type of dilemma wouldn't have been a problem whatsoever. However, in recent years, I started adapting a more tactile approach using miniatures and game boards to spark the imagination of my players. And it really led to a lot of exciting moments on the table back when we were playing in person. The transition to virtual gaming was a little bit of a rough thing for me. I quickly switched over to using graphics. I was a Roll20 supporter, still am, and using digital maps, tokens, things like that to actually bring the experience alive for the players. That in combination with my descriptions, and as you've seen in the past few videos I've done, there's a lot you can do to engage player imagination. It wasn't until about 2 months ago that I really started feeling like I needed more out of my sessions. Not only for myself from a creative standpoint, I mean, running 3 sessions a week, you really run the risk of having creative burnout, but also somehow to engage my players in a more dynamic way. I was finding that my online sessions were turning into more like a video game session than it was an actual D&D session, with players utilizing their computer to move their mouse around and move the tokens around. And I started to feel like even though I was providing great descriptions, that their visual on this game was simply reduced to basically a video game type interface. So it wasn't until a couple months ago that I actually discovered that, there are platforms out there that allow you to stream virtual tabletops. And by virtual tabletops, I mean your tabletop that you have in your game space, streaming it to the players to see. There are a lot of different software programs that allow for this, and a lot of creative ways that you as a dungeon master can bring your table to the players. I'm going to show you one of those methods today. It's the method that I've been using for about 2 months now, and I think I've had some great success with it. The feedback from the players is that they're more engaged in the game. It's firing their imagination up in greater ways than it did with just a flat 2D tabletop. Miniature gaming was the one hobby of mine that really amped up my creativity. I fell in love with miniature gaming in the early 2000s. It was more to do with the actual scenery and the immersion that I saw taking place on the table. For me, it was less about the game, which was exciting, and they still are to me, but it was more about the immersion that I could see taking place on the table. A combination of diorama terrain making mixed in with miniature gaming, or D&D sensibilities when it comes to miniatures and sort of that role play mentality. So I've now decided that I'm bringing that hobby into my Dungeons & Dragons tables. So the table you're about to see is a table that was created on Monday. So this only took me about a day. I did have a lot of the necessary materials. This is just one table that I make on a weekly basis. I do have 3 groups, so I have 3 separate tables that I use. This particular table was created with the mindset that the players are going to be starting a new campaign in a place called the Lost Isle. And the Lost Isle is a dinosaur-filled kind of Jurassic Park-ish environment, and I wanted to give them something that would give them a feeling of being in an area that they hadn't really been in before. I wanted to move away from traditional taverns and towns and roads and that kind of thing. That these players are explorers who have been sent to the Lost Isle after a massive crisis has besieged the island. The crisis has been averted, and now explorers from the mainland are traveling to the Lost Isle to set up camps and outposts to start their exploration to bring trade and commerce back to the island after hundreds of years. So our players actually play a small group of adventurers who are starting off in this area. I've named this little area, this little starting area, called Bounder's Cove. And Bounder's Cove is essentially a small outpost where all these adventurers sort of meet, and a small little community has sprung up. Vendors, tavern, all the typical fantasy tropes, but I've framed it in a little bit of a different environment so that it gives it a unique feel to it. So what you're seeing right here is my roughly 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot, well, maybe 2 by 2, sorry. This is actually a 2 by 2, give or take, board that I've created for Bounder's Cove. Right off the bat, what you've seen is I've actually created this board on top of some foam that I purchased at Home Depot, and I actually used the water terrain that I put on top of it for another campaign that I was running. I was running a seafaring campaign, and so what I did is I said I'm going to create this cove, and it's going to be a small series of small little land masses that are interconnected with walkways. And as you can see, there's these small little rocks, and it's kind of like a Pirate's Cove kind of mentality is what I had when I created it. It was kind of just sprung up really quickly on the fly, but it does have a unique look to it. So I envisioned this as players moving about, adventurers moving about the area, and these little waterways are kind of streaming through the place. As you see new adventurers arriving, I even grabbed some oval-shaped wood there to represent boats as adventurers are kind of moving and docking as they come from the mothership or the big ship that's anchored not too far offshore. The big ship obviously not wanting to come inland because of the dangers. So for this particular one, I've used some pre-modeled scenery that I've purchased, as well as the Warlock tile system to create some small buildings. Now obviously these buildings aren't to scale because they'd be really tiny on the inside if they were, but they represent the shops. I have a larger one that I've used over there for the tavern, and I've thrown in a smatter of terrain that I've created, as well as some jungle trees, some trees over here that I've created from other miniature games. Just in general stuff to give it kind of that Lost World kind of vibe to it. Now, this particular scenario as it played out had the players just coming and moving from spot to spot, purchasing their gear and getting equipped for their life of adventuring. At near the end of it, I threw in a little lizard man encounter down here. And the scenery, or the scene, was essentially that the lizard men of the area have started pushing back, or lizard folk have started pushing back against these explorers and started testing their defenses. So we had a couple lizard men kind of creep into the cove a little bit and start a little ruckus over here, and the players responded in kind. All of this is actually broadcasted through Discord, as I currently use Discord to communicate, but also use it to stream my virtual table to the players. I use an app for the Logitech Webcam called the Logi app, which allows me to zoom in and around and also create different effects as well as brightness and things like that. This brings the tabletop to life. Zooming in also with my camera, I can actually get right down to the players and give them a sense of being actually a part of my table. If the players want to move their figures or their characters, they simply ask me through Discord and I'll move their character. But from time to time during the stream, I will move the camera around just to give them a little bit more of a scenic view of what's going on. I kind of feel like a little miniature director, a little miniature film director, kind of a mini George Lucas. But all of this serves to create a massively big impact on the players' imagination and their enjoyment of the session. So what exactly do you need to create sort of a setup like this and bring this type of online play to your players? Well, it's really simple, actually. The first thing you would want to do is, I would say, sign up for a Discord account. Get your Discord up and running. I use Discord to voice communicate, but the other benefit of Discord is that you can do image sharing. Not only that, but you can actually also share your screen. So if there is things that you need players to see to help them through their session, you can just broadcast your screen, which is all your digital tools that's right on your computer. They'll be able to see you there. But also the big one is the video streaming. So having that function in Discord is really the core of what makes a virtual table like this happen. My second tool that you would need, or the second tool you would need, would be a webcam. Preferably something that's in high resolution so that your players really get the best of it. And a tripod helps, but it's not necessary. Oftentimes you can get some books or whatever you need to prop up your webcam. It's not too often that you're actually going to be moving the webcam. The Logi app software actually takes care of a lot of the panning. And if you have a good enough camera, there's a large enough focus on it that you can move around without actually physically moving the camera. But having a tripod just helps you position it in different places. My next goal is actually to get a swing arm or a boom arm, to be able to move the camera on the fly without having to pick the webcam up or on the tripod. So those are some of the actual two tools. Now you're probably asking, Dwayne, I don't have all that scenery. What's the cost involved? How much work are you putting into creating all this? I'll admit, right now at 3 days a week, creating 3 different sessions, my scenery storage is getting a little out of hand. I'm running campaigns in 3 different areas. I'm currently running a jungle biome, as you can see. I'm running a ocean biome, and I'm running a sky biome, believe it or not. So as your players move about the game world, you are going to be pushed for having to create different scenery elements to really bring the table alive. Now, having said that, really at the end of the day, all you really need is a good game mat, which would be gridded out for Dungeons and Dragons play. I use the card ones that Wizard of the Coast sells, the battle mats or the card mats, which is flipping over from forest to dungeon. And you can draw in most of this. Again, starting small is not a bad thing. Allowing the players to see a gridded out table, some basic drawn scenery, that's enough to spark their imagination. Also allowing you a little bit more control over the combat. So it helps a lot to be able to move those miniatures around and allow the players to visualize it in a 3D space. As your creativity grows, you might want to look at building hills or adding different elements that you can from your hobby crafting into the game table and slowly building up your collection or your library of different scenery elements. A lot of this stuff can become reusable, and you don't have to worry about necessarily creating something unique for each session. Building some trees, for example, obviously going to be carried over from encounter to encounter. Now, it's important to note as well that when doing a virtual table like this, albeit you're going to be tempted to just show the camera and show them what they see. But as I said in previous videos, always make sure that you're fleshing out your virtual table with the necessary descriptions to go with it. So if you are going to show them the table, make sure that you throw in those awesome descriptives about the water, the trees, the wind, the ground, just like we talked about in my last video. It's important to evoke the imagination of the players on all levels. So that's just an overview of one of my virtual tables that I have and some ideas in general about how I go about creating these set pieces. Always let your imagination free. The way that I work sometimes is I will create a set piece and frame an encounter around it, or sometimes I get an idea in my head and I go and build the actual terrain to go with it. It's a dangerous hole to go into because as your imagination spirals, you're going to be hard-pressed to create a tangible, physical realization of that on the table. So it will get to the point where unless you're funded by Industrial Light and Magic or Disney, you're not going to be able to create some of these really elaborate set pieces. And not to mention, one thing to be aware of is the cost that could potentially come along with it. Buying miniatures, when you're looking to create an encounter based around a creature you don't have miniatures for, you're faced with that decision about whether you use a proxy miniature or whether you run to the local hobby store and spend $20 on the necessary miniatures. My collection is growing. I do this for a living, so for me it's a little bit different, and I consider that an investment into the business, but nonetheless, the cost is starting to go up. So just keep that in mind and try and set your expectations at a level that's manageable. Your players will forgive you if you don't have a giant red dragon on the table when they're fighting a giant red dragon, but everything you can do to spark that imagination is going to win them over. So thanks for taking some time to see how I run my virtual table. Hopefully you've gotten some ideas from this, and if you want to share your tips or tricks or anything like that, or better yet, if you have any questions about some of the minutia of how I set these tables up, feel free to leave comments. Again, please like and subscribe, and make sure you check out those notifications as well. Hopefully you're finding something in my content that's helping you out at the table. Take care.